that we've established that the first principle about property risk management is to define your objectives and define your calling, then we take risks that are connected to that calling. Second step is we need to consider the uncertainties that sit around taking those property risks. So let's think about those uncertainties. Now, the first thing we need to understand is that every property, every church building is different. It has different environments, it's in a different location, is made of different materials. So whether you're in a regional area sitting near a river and you've got flood risk, or whether you're out in the more rural zones and you've got fire risk, or whether you're indeed in a metro area and you might be in a high storm risk or an earthquake risk, you've got to consider locally what the risks are or what the uncertainties are that sit around your particular property. Now, there's a couple of things that are very, very common with most properties, and I want to kind of go back to the insurance world and let it inform us of where most of the claims are. Now, we know in the last 5 to 10 years our fire risk has improved quite significantly with the onset of rules and regulations and the sprinklers and the fire hydrants and all the fire risks. So that used to be the number one risk. It's now come back and it's now number two. As far as fire risk, I would encourage you just to consider a couple of things. Firstly, if we think about year 12, you go back to year 12 and think about fire. What are the elements of fire? There is oxygen, there's heat, and there's fuel. So I'd like you to consider a couple of things when it comes to your fire risk. Number one is inside your biggest risk, the biggest uncertainty comes when you have an open flame inside. So for many churches, having candles, inside where you've got kitchens with open flames and gas, those are the sort of things where you create the most risk when it comes to internal fire. So just be very considerate when it comes to using those, anything with an open flame inside. The second thing is, let's think of fuel, and it's on the outside. So one of the biggest areas that we see insurance claims in particular is when we have fuel loads that are sitting against the property, particularly outside, and particularly when you have timber elements to your property. How does that work practically? Think about your bins. That's the number one area. When you sit a bin up against the timber, it's got nice and dry fuel inside. Somebody flicks a cigarette in there, or a kid puts something like that in there. All of a sudden, you've got a fire and we've seen many fires in all different kinds of areas, from bin fires that have caught hold on church buildings. So that's the fire risk, but that's now number two. So, what's the number one area of uncertainty when it comes to our buildings? Storm damage. And in particular, that comes under the category of weather risks. Now, I've got here some data from AAMI on their home folio, and I can tell you of all of their claims, their top 5 claims are all weather related. So I'm not sure whether you are a climate change person or not, or whether you think it's man-made or you think it's just a cyclic thing. It really doesn't matter. Insurance companies, they totally believe in climate change because they see the claims that are coming through from weather risk, and we know that these frequency of storms are getting greater and greater, and into the future we've really got to consider the way we manage uncertainty around the weather. So if I go to this AAMI, we're talking storm, we're talking water leakage, hail damage, and windstorm. They're all in the top 5 claims. Now, how do you stop a wind claim? How do you stop a storm claim? Well, a really good question. You really can't. You can't manage the weather. You can't manage the climate. But what you can do is you can manage your building. In particular, where do all of the claims come from when it comes to weather events? On the roof. That's the biggest area, and that's the biggest area that you need to manage and maintain. So the thing that I'm going to encourage you to do, number one, is clean your gutters. Keep your gutters nice and clean. We need all of that water when it comes through. It needs to funnel out nice and cleanly. Number 2 is have a look at the gutter structure. If you think about it, when a whole bunch of water comes in off a roof, okay, and it comes in a big volume, if the gutters can't cope, the water's got to flow somewhere. So it's either going to flow outside of the gutter and over into the water, or it's going to flow inside and down the walls. So we need to consider the factors or the uncertainty around that and manage our roofing systems. How about having a look at the tiles or the colour bond, whichever roof structure you are, make sure that there's any of the gaps or the flashing is in good order. So first thing we want to do is we want to consider our roofs. Another tip that I can encourage you with now, please don't get me wrong, I don't want people all of a sudden jumping on ladders and walking up there and trying to, that's a disaster. That creates a whole other people risk that we don't want to have as well. So we're not going to, particularly you look at a building like this one and it's quite a high roof, nobody's getting up on a ladder like that, and things like cherry pickers are very expensive. So how do we maintain, how do we manage the roofs? Okay, I'm going to give you 2 really cool tips. The first one is I encourage you to look at things like Skyvax. Skyvax is a wet and dry vacuum cleaner. It's got a big super long extendable arm. I think it can go up about 3 stories high, and it's got a little camera, and it literally can suck all of the rubbish and the mud and everything out of your gutters. So if you've got muddy gutters and quite a high roof, consider a Skyvax. You can hire them or they're available for purchase. The second one that I want to encourage you to do, particularly I know for our churches in rural areas, there's often very small churches, and there is genuine issues in trying to get to do our roof maintenance. So the thing that I would encourage you to do is to reach out to your local community, reach out to the local SCS or your local CFA or your local rural fire brigade, whatever that is in whichever state you are. And very often they'll be very happy to come down and help you to clean your gutters and do a bit of basic maintenance. They've got all the ladders and they've got all these big extendable trucks and things like that they are very happy to help you with, because you know what happens? If there is an emergency and the wind's blowing and half the roof's blown off, who do you think you're going to call? You're going to call your local fire brigade or your local SES, and so they're very happy most of the time to come down and help you do some maintenance. So let me encourage you with your property risk. Think about the uncertainties. Think about your environment. Make a priority list at a local church level. There's a great thing for your church property committee to do. Firstly, define what the objectives of the property are. What's our calling? What's our vision for this property? And then secondly, what are the uncertainties that sit around our property? How about I challenge you to do this? Come up with the top 5 risks, the top 5 uncertainties, and address them. And I reckon if you can do that, for the most part, you won't have any problems with your property. Let me encourage you, get out there for the sake of the gospel. Let's be good stewards of what God has given us.